Good morning. Today we're going to resume our previous presentation on desiccant dehumidifiers and talk about those a little bit more in depth than we have. If you're in commercial work already, you have either already used a desiccant dehumidifier or you will have the need to use one in the future on commercial stuff and even in some large residentials. So we're going to talk about a little bit more about how they work and the functionality and when they are good to use and when they may not be good to use. So let's look at that and go from there. The thing about a desiccant, you have to prepare yourself for different airflows with a desiccant, and with an LGR or conventional uh, home type dehumidifiers, airflow is usually not very much of a concern. Although you may set your LGR or your portable dehumidifier by the return air to get better airflow through the house. It's about the only time that you deal with a lot of airflow when it comes to a dehumidifier in a portable dehumidifier setting. Now, you may deal with airflow on your negative air machines and containment areas and stuff like that, but on the dehumidifier itself, you're really not going to deal that much with airflow on portable units. So, three different airflows with desiccants that you can play with your airflow on a building in order to achieve your best results for drying and or containment and or the overall air quality of the building. Sometimes one type of airflow may dry slower, but it may be the best result for the building for different reasons. Sometimes it may be faster. So it just depends on your individual circumstance as to um, which type that you'll choose. And we're going to talk about which types are and when to choose those types and some of the advantages and disadvantages of each. Um, there's a the airflow is produced by the blowers on the machine, and it just they've got dampers in them. Depends on which damper you're using. Depends on how you have your hose configuration set up, and several different things can give you your airflow, whether it be negative or positive. Um, Excuse me for skipping back and forth there for a moment. But positive airflow, we'll talk about that a little bit. Positive airflow means you're actually going to put positive pressure into the building. You're going to put extra air into a building, and that air, once you put it into a building, unless your building has a balloon atmosphere, that air is going to escape somewhere out that building. It is not possible to put more air pressure in a building and expect it to stay in the building. That would not be a positive airflow. So let's talk about why we do positive airflows. There's two or three different reasons. One reason would be, let's say that it is really cold outside and the grains of moisture are really low. Then you might use a positive airflow. Let's say that there's a lot of workers coming in at the building, and regardless of how much you try to keep that environment tight, the door is going to be open to light. You might use a positive airflow. So, a lot of different reasons use positive. Negative airflow is basically pulling air out of the building. And again, unless you have a balloon type atmosphere, that air that you pull out of the building is going to be replaced by air that comes back in to the building. Now, you can put that air back into the building by an artificial means, such as a negative or positive air machine. Makeup air is what's commonly referred to, or it will just seep in from the way buildings leak. So you have to be real careful when you're doing negative air pressure as far as maintaining a good drying environment. The next pressure is a neutral pressure, and this would be similar to what you would have when you're using a conventional LGR. You're not putting more air into the building than you're taking out. So let's just say, for example, you're putting 5,000 CFM of dry air in the building. Your return is pulling 5,000 CFM of moist air back out of the building. So you would not be increasing the pressure or decreasing the pressure. When you get scientifically down to it, you have a meter called a manometer, and you can use a manometer to record these pressures. They have recording manometers to where you get an actual tape readout. You've got electronic manometers where it sends you the readings so you can tell what's going on from your cell phone when you're looking at the readings on there. So if you need the type of service such as asbestos or mold or something that would require you to record and document and or to be extra careful about when you have negative or positive airflows, then you would need to consider using a manometer to monitor the situation to make sure you stay there. If you're on a drying project, and that's pretty much it, not going to affect the drying that much if something shuts down or something and your positive and negative airflow change for a short period of time. Um, Positive, negative, neutral, positive, again, cold climates when grains are low outside. If you've got grains that are extremely low outside, why not use that outside air that God has created for us and put it into the building? Well, the only reason you normally cannot do that is because it's too cold. And normally, cold air does have a low grain atmosphere to it, and the air is excellent for drying a building. But it's like using your hair dryer on a cold setting. It would take an extreme amount of time, even though the air is dry, to get a building dry if it's cold. So you have to keep the building warm. But if you can use that low grain air from the outside, you're a lot better off. So if you have a cold climate, you can take that air from the outside, run it through your desiccant dehumidifier, which will dry it even drier, and then it will warm that up and put warm, extremely dry air into the building. Um, and you may change that during the course of the job. Let's say you get to a building and it's really wet and you've got 70 grains of moisture in the air in the building, and you only have 20 grains of moisture in the air outside. You start positive pressure. Well, you go about 2 days and now the building's getting dry, and that reverses that your air inside the building is now drier than the outside. Then you would want to swap from positive over to a negative or neutral. Again, only when you're considering drying, not considering mold or containment or other contaminations, then you have to look at it two ways. Number one, how do I get the building dry? Number two, how do I maintain the pressure that I would like to achieve in the area that we're working on? Negative pressure. Uh, you would use negative pressure sometimes with mold containment. You've got a good containment set up in the building, but you need to dry. A lot of times, or most times, in a mold environment, you're going to at least maintain a slight amount of negative pressure. It's better to do that with mechanical devices such as a NAM, negative air machine, a scrubber. A lot of people don't know the difference. The difference between a NAM and a scrubber is a negative air machine don't necessarily need a filter when you're dealing with mold. It just needs to pull air from inside the building to outside or outside to inside, depending on how you want your pressure to be. An air scrubber actually scrubs the air. Most of the time, we don't use a NAM because we don't want to even put extremely contaminated mold air out into the environment if it's going to be around people. You certainly would not do that in an asbestos event either. And you'll have both these events that still have water involved. You may have asbestos ceiling tile that have all fallen to the ground or the floor of the building that has asbestos in it, but the entire building's wet. So you have to do both of them at the same time. So negative pressure would could be good for that. Definitely would not want to positively pressurize that building and send those contaminants into other areas. Uh, Again, with mold contamination, most of the time you're going to pull negative pressure. That way, you're not blowing mold spores further into the building. You're actually pulling it out of the building and either through the desiccant dehumidifier and or out into the atmosphere. Some people like to put HEPA filters at the entrance to their desiccant so you don't pull mold spores into the desiccant. Some people have the hypothesis that that's a moot point because when you run the desiccant air back through the heaters at about 250 to 300 degrees, that it's going to inactivate any mold spores that are going through it. So that's more of an indoor air quality issue that you'd want to talk to your hygienist about. It certainly can be done either way. Neutral pressure, you would use that as usually your very best drying method. Again, given the fact that the air on the outside of the building is not really low grain. Let's say it's the opposite. Your air on the outside of the building's 99 grains per pound, and on the inside of the building, even though it be wet, is 70. Well, you want to run neutral pressure because if you run negative, you're going to pull that 99% air into the building through something. It's impossible not to without imploding the building. So if you're sucking more air out of the building than you are mechanically putting into the building, it's pulling that air down the air vents, through your makeup air systems, through cracks and crevices in the building, through open doors every time somebody opens a door, and a variety of different ways that it would pull that air into the building. So you certainly don't want to pull more wet air into the building. High humid areas, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, pretty much anywhere in the southeast, neutral pressure is your best drying method. Um, and what neutral pressure does is you're pulling the same amount of air out of the building you're putting in. Think about it like an air conditioning system. It don't just sit outside and blow cold air in. It blows cold air in, and then it takes the hot air back out through the return and it reprocesses that air. So every time that you reprocess that air, you're making the air a little bit colder and a little bit colder and a little bit colder with air conditioning. When you're talking about dehumidification, you're making the air a little bit drier, a little bit drier, a little bit drier each time it cycles through that dehumidifier. So neutral pressure is the most highly effective way of drying unless your outside grains are extremely low and no dehumidifier anywhere can keep up with that. So sometimes you change that around. So it's into the science of drying a building. Uh, Desiccants can be used for more than drying buildings. They also can be used for moisture control. Let's say you're in Florida and there's a building that did not really get wet, but the air conditioners during a hurricane or tornado, or maybe even just for a maintenance problem, are down. They got pulled off the roof. They got tore up. They're taking them out for maintenance, and something went wrong. They're not going to be able to replace them for a while. Well, if you've got a very high humidity level outside and you don't have any moisture controls, i.e., climate controlled storage is why they climate controlled storage areas, then your stuff in that building is going to absorb moisture. The ceiling tile will absorb moisture and sag after a few days. Your furniture is in the building. The upholstery will absorb moisture and start to have microbial growth on them. Sheetrock absorbs moisture. Pretty much everything in the building will absorb moisture. With temperature variations, you may even have dew inside the building, uh, without any moisture control. So sometimes you use a desiccant for moisture control just in areas where your moisture control systems that have been engineered into the building have been damaged. Uh, it affects your indoor air quality. If it's hot in the building and the air is real humid, it's a lot harder to breathe than it is if you're in a hot environment and it's really dry. The best example of that is go to Texas on a 110-degree day and see how comfortable you are, and then go to Las Vegas on a 110-degree day, and it's as much difference as you could consider. I remember being at Las Vegas one time and laying out by the pool in 117 degrees was not that uncomfortable. Got a really fast suntan, but it really wasn't that uncomfortable. If you tried Tennessee or Texas at Florida at 117 with the humidity there, you wouldn't be able to breathe at all. You wouldn't be able to stay outside. So, dry air will make the comfortable atmosphere a lot more, will make an atmosphere a lot more comfortable than wet air does. And last but not least, desiccants are a lot more effective at drying dense materials. Uh, and it's not because it's a desiccant, it's because the air is so dry. The desiccant will normally be about twice as dry as a refrigerant dehumidifier. Um, and so you're drying with a lot drier air. The drier you get your air, the quicker you're going to have evaporation. Quicker you have evaporation, the quicker your materials will return to a normal moisture content. Um, we've already talked about it really in the previous slide, but you want to keep moisture levels down. In this example, you can tell by the tubes running over, you're running positive air pressure into the building that is being controlled with moisture control at this point. It's a little bit more difficult to run return lines when you got a machine sitting this far from the building. It's not impossible, but more difficult. But this would be a picture showing a positive setup, and you're running dry air into a building to control humidity. We have containment set up here. Obviously, they've got either renovation or something going on into a building, and desiccants are great at controlling those moisture levels in large buildings. Uh, Control it in small ones too, but it's overkill in most places. But you can control the moisture in those large buildings and help maintain that comfortable environment that they will need for the uh, people visiting the building. You also have to maintain a relatively comfortable environment for the workers in the building. New OSHA regulations out that I don't see too many people following at all, but your OSHA regulations for working conditions for your employees, particularly when they're in PPE, are astronomical. Nobody's going by them, and we're leaving a lot of money on the table because if you go by the OSHA regulations, which you could, and if and when you get caught without going through them, and all it takes is one employee complaint, you'll wish you had. But you have to maintain a relatively comfortable environment for your employees. If you don't, you have to give them an extreme amount of additional breaks to cool off and to get water. And it can be as much as taking a break every 10 minutes. Work 10, rest 10, work 10, rest 10. It's 50% of your day, any way you cut it. Uh, so your options there are keeping the environment clean and, or not clean, but comfortable within the OSHA regulations so your employees can continue to work. Dehumidification would be a part of that. Air conditioning would be the other part. So, do we want the guys working in the building and the girls working in the building at 70 degrees and being able to continue to work with an air conditioner in, or do you want to take the air conditioner out of the equation and let it raise to 95 and take a break every 10 minutes? It's just a business decision at that point. You can use desiccants on residential, commercial, and industrial, depending on what size desiccants you have and what their heating source is. They make small desiccants for residential that go maybe 1,000 CFM. That is an excellent desiccant to do a home and dry it a lot faster, a lot more efficient than refrigerant desiccant or dehumidification of any type because the air is so much drier. It will pull a lot of electricity, but a lot of times you can still plug it into house power. Uh, you also don't have to worry about temperature as much. As you all know or should know if you're listening to this, if you get your temperature raised up in a house pretty high because the air conditioner system's down, your refrigerant dehumidifier will not work. It won't let the coils get cold enough to accumulate the moisture, to freeze the moisture, and then evacuate it out of the building. So if you're running a refrigerant in a house that's 100 degrees, you're wasting time and money. So a desiccant would take the place of that and help that out. Desiccant equally works well in cold environments. However, you're still going to have an evaporation issue in a cold environment. Whether no matter what kind of dehumidifier you use, you're going to have trouble getting evaporation going like you need to. Commercial, if you're using a dehumidifier that runs off of electricity, you're probably going to need an outside generator to power the source. You're talking about 150 amps of 480 volt power. A lot of your commercial buildings have 480 volt running into the building, and they go straight to a transformer and transform it down to 208 volts, which is the commercial version of 110 power. 208 goes into 220. It would run what you in a house refer to as 220 volt power, and then of course they split off that and make 110 power to operate normal stuff you have in a commercial building. Uh, Sometimes you can run those off the building. Requires an industrial electrician to come in and to set that up. Most of the time, the time delay, and the price charges from an industrial electrician to come in and do that far exceeds the cost of getting a generator and running the equipment off of a generator. Industrial, uh, they typically have large amounts of electricity. They typically have 480 volt electricity, and most of the time they have electricians on site. So when you're doing industrial applications, a lot of times you might be able to give them the option of running off of a generator. However, once again, an industrial or commercial electrician figure that out. They may already have the grid and the bus bars in that building running at near capacity before you got there. They may not have an additional 150 amps of 480 volt electricity to give to you to pull away from that. So you may overload the entire building. So you've got to have somebody that knows what they're doing to hook those up and to be sure you're doing it in a safe manner. LGRs normally work better when you're dealing with houses 2,500 square feet and below. Uh, you can do bigger houses with more, but typically when you get too much bigger, you start looking at the efficiency of using a desiccant. Uh, Desiccants, you can get them again in sizes down, I think, to 450 CFM all the way up to 25,000 CFM for larger buildings. Uh, so you just have to when you put your drawing plan together, you just have to decide which is better for your drawing plan. We're not teaching water restoration today, but if you don't have a plan before you start drying the building, you have violated the IICRC standards of how to dry a building. The standard says you must have a written drying plan before you start to dry a building, so just keep that in mind. Pros and cons: LGRs don't work in high temperatures. Sometimes drains are hard to find. Get an office building, they may have a central bathroom down the hallway to the left, and you're working on the other end, but there's no drains to drain your water out of the dehumidifiers. You may have trouble doing that. I've seen people throw a hose over into a 5 gallon bucket, and if your moisture level is even low, but definitely medium to high, and your dehumidifier is working good, it'll overflow that overnight, and now you've got water all on the floor. Never a good deal. So a lot of people use 30 to 50 gallon barrels or drums. Uh, those work, but they're heavy, and you got to figure out a way to pump those out and to get them to the drain area too. So a lot of times when you've got issues in a building to where you do not have a lot of places to run your drain hoses, then that's a con, if you will, for the LGR. Uh, LGRs are also difficult if you're doing the 15th floor of a building with no elevator. You've got to carry them up 15 flights of steps. It makes it a little bit more difficult. Desiccants, what makes them difficult? They're harder to use in occupied spaces in some instances because they are such a high heat environment. Now you can control the heat if the building heat air conditioning system will have enough flexibility to just crank it up. Then that will control the heat. You can also pre-cool or post-cool a desiccant that's running in to help with that problem. The other part about a desk, the con to an LGR is, say, in a big box store, Walmart, Home Depot, something's going to try to remain open. You get back to that drainage issue where you're going to find a drain in the back corner of Home Depot, but you also get into trip hazards with your cords and your hoses, and then most your warehouse type stores like that will not have enough electricity to run your LGRs where they will a desiccant. Uh, a desiccant, the cons on the desiccant in those big areas, again, is your heat, but you usually can tie your tube up high and get your dry air distributed pretty good. Uh, the con to a desiccant would be an apartment building. You cannot, in most cases, leave the doors open going into people's residence or apartments. They've got stuff in there, and you just can't open the door and let your dry air from your desiccant tube that's running down the hallway into the building. There's no way to get air into the apartment from outside. In a lot of instances, that is easy or feasible. So that makes a desiccant a little bit harder to use on an apartment building or a hotel. If the hotel rooms are evacuated, then sometimes you can get away with propping the door open, but you normally cannot do that in an office building that has different offices in it. Say a center rents out to different people. That would be hard to do. or an office building that requires security. That would be hard to do. Sometimes you'll have a problem with the desiccant having a place outside to set it. You get in a city environment where you got a sidewalk and people are using the sidewalk on a daily basis, and you can't set it in the streets, you can't set it on the sidewalk, you can't clog up the loading docks because that's going to stop their deliveries and trucks from coming in and out. So it makes a desiccant a little difficult too. You need to be able to consider alternate ways of running that desiccant over the sidewalk and different things such as that to be able to use them. You have to get creative a little bit with a desiccant and an LGR situation at the same time. It can be done. You just have to do your drawing plan and figure out which way is the best. We talked about the three types of desiccants vaguely, but let's go over them a little more into detail. And all desiccants have an amount of electricity to run the blowers that either blow air or suck air, either which way you look at it, and to run the gauges and the thermostats and the safety controls. So all of them are going to run off some amount of electricity. When we refer to an electric desiccant, we refer to one that's all electric. You put the electricity to it and it works. They are the simplest desiccant to operate. There's a lot less that goes wrong, a lot less adjustments on them, but they use an extreme amount of electricity. If you run it on a generator, you can burn about 8 gallons of fuel an hour to run an all electric desiccant. If you run it on the building, you're going to run about 150 amps and 480 volt if the building has 480 volt available. So electric is good because it's simple, but it has its own set of difficulties with it. Propane, that's a desiccant that simply the heat source runs off propane. Uh, Now you only have to have enough electricity to run the blowers. You usually can get away with 50 amps of 240, assuming the machine is built like that. This older machine that's pictured here is a dual fired desiccant. It'll run on propane heat source or electric, so it's still a 480 volt powered machine, but it uses like 15 amps of 480 volt. And then the propane fires it if you're running the heat on propane, or you can flip the switch and run the heat on electricity. So it just depends. It's a typo down there where it says 320 volts. No such animal. That's 420, 220, 440, 480. Different electricians call it different because they have a little bit of a variance in them. The third type of desiccant is a diesel fired desiccant. That is when you have electric burners uh, you have electric motors on the desiccant. Most of them will run on 220 volt, 50 amps of electricity, which is the same as a stove plug in a house, so relatively low electricity. And then your heaters are fired by a diesel fueled heater. So you have a diesel tank, you fill it up with diesel, and the diesel fires that. So very low electricity driven unit, about 2.5 gallons of fuel per hour. So your fuel consumption is a lot less than trying to run an all electric desiccant. So today we went over a lot about desiccants. It's a lot of information to shove into a 30 to 40 minute speech on it. A lot of times it's you just have to sit back and look at the situation, scratch your head, and see what works best for you on the particular job. There is no one piece of equipment that the cat's meow that'll do it all. So you just have to try to engineer that and figure that out. If you get stumped on one, have any questions, my name and phone number's there. Feel free to give me a call at any time. Call Mr. Dick Wagner or Mr. Bill Giannone. They can also help you with that, and I'll be glad to help you out. The main thing we would all tell you is don't turn any jobs down. If you look at something and you think it's too big, it's not. It can be done. So just give one of the three of us a call and we'll give you the resources to get it done. I'm Scott Tarpley, and thank you for your attendance today, and call if you need anything. Thank you.